My brother is vehemently against giving or receiving presents for birthdays or Christmas. To him, these days are arbitrary time markers repeated every year, and so he doesn't see the point in celebrating these days at all, let alone marking them with the obligation to give or receive gifts for birthdays, or give and receive gifts at Christmas, preferably gifts of similar monetary value. It's all bull, he says, so he just doesn't do it. Now, this may sound blasphemous, but I wonder if the importance of Easter can be lost because it comes up every year with a long weekend and we all say Christ is risen. Lame. And we sing the same songs and we hear the same scripture stories, and the significance of the resurrection of Jesus is at least muted, if not lost. Christ is risen, well, okay, I knew that already. We say it all the freaking time, so what? And so this section of this year's preaching series, Back to School Children's Bible Stories for Radical Disciples, will focus on the story of the Exodus. And my hope is that by reading the Exodus story side by side with this season of celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, the significance of the latter might be somewhat resurrected for you too. So let's look at the context of where we are in the Bible. Genesis is the first book, and it describes God's creation of all things, including humans in their image, and the ancient stories of humans humaning, and God remaining with them anyways. Genesis ends with the story of Joseph, sold into slavery, but finding favor with the Pharaoh and helping the people survive a famine. He's then reunited with his father, and the Hebrew hero Joseph brings his family back to Egypt, where his descendants, the Israelites, or the Hebrew people, grew rapidly in number, coexisting peacefully with the Egyptian society. 400 years pass, and now we are in the book of Exodus. And the verse just before what Caitlin read this morning says, "The Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong." That language is right out of Genesis chapter 1, where humans are created by God and commanded to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. So that term prolific, better translated as teeming or swarming, mirrors the Genesis description of waters teeming or swarming with sea creatures. So right in the opening verses of Exodus, we already see a recurring theme in the Torah, creation, which sets up what happens next in the story. So we hear, a new king came into power, one who did not, or maybe chose not, to remember Joseph and how he had ensured the welfare of Egypt in a time of distress. He was, in the words of Nadia Bolz-Weber, an insecure, tyrannical racist who was lacking in wisdom. It happens. End quote. Israel's status quickly deteriorated from welcome guests to fearsome aliens and oppressed slaves. From this king or Pharaoh's point of view, this prolific mass of teeming Israelites poses a threat. What if they join ranks with Egypt's enemies and then rebel? So his first line of attack, get this teeming mass under control. So the Hebrews become slaves in Egypt. The supply cities of Pharaoh, warehouses of national ambition and stockpiles against fear, were built with the sweat and blood and muscle of Hebrew slaves. They were given quotas for the making of bricks, for the building of monumental architecture that would hoard wealth and proclaim glory for a flexing demagogue. Bad move, Pharaoh. By trying to control the Israelite population, he is unwittingly pitting himself against Israel's God, the God of Genesis, who intends for them to be fruitful and multiply, as we hear in Genesis. He may not know it yet, but Pharaoh is picking a fight with the Creator. And at the risk of spoiling the whole story for you, let me just put it out there, this will not end well for him. So, slavery is not crushing the Israelites enough. So Pharaoh moves to infanticide. Hebrew male babies were taken from them and drowned in the river. I'm assuming males because of the fear that they would grow up to be soldiers. Pharaoh lets the females live, however, and the story leaves us guessing why, but to become sexual slaves is probably a safe bet. And at that point in the story, 5 females step up. 5 women in particular play prominent roles. The midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, Moses' initially unnamed sister and mother, later named Miriam and Jochebed, and Pharaoh's daughter. These are heroes who collude to undermine Pharaoh. Did you notice that the midwives' names were given, but the name of Pharaoh, Egypt's semi-divine ruler who controlled the fate of Israel, is not given? Maybe the writer of Exodus didn't know it, or maybe it wasn't worth mentioning, or maybe Pharaoh is less a historical figure than an archetypal villain. Either way, the women are remembered and honoured, while whoever the Pharaoh is forgotten and shamed. Pharaoh is further shamed in the story by being outwitted by 2 Hebrew midwives. Rather than carry out Pharaoh's edict, the midwives let the boys live. And when Pharaoh confronts them about it, they flat out lie to him and insult the Egyptian women for good measure. They say, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, they are vigorous and they give birth before the midwife comes to them. The midwives lie, and God rewards their lying by giving them families of their own. Might sound a bit odd, but keep in mind that these midwives are women, they are enslaved, and they are foreign. Marginalized people back then had to be courageously clever when confronting unchecked and absolute power. Very little has changed. In a world of white male privilege, people of colour, particularly women of colour, too often still need to be clever and crafty when they are facing unchecked white male authority. Pharaoh's next move is to command the Egyptians, because he can't trust the Hebrews, to throw Hebrew boys into the Nile. Enter, stage left, Moses' mother. And like the midwives, she schemes to keep her sons safe from Pharaoh's decree by hiding him first, and then when he gets a bit older, sending him down the river in a waterproof basket. And Moses' sister follows the basket until it comes to rest on the riverbank, where, in the very definition of irony, Pharaoh's own daughter rescues Moses. Moses' sister cleverly intervenes. She goes, hey, what a cute baby you've got there. You know, I might just know a Hebrew woman who could nurse him until he's ready to come back here. What do you think? Sure, sounds like a wonderful plan. Go ahead. Pharaoh's daughter must have put 2 and 2 together, that this is one of the Hebrew infants under her father's death sentence. She adopts him. She keeps him safe right under her father's nose, just as Moses' father had done. And with that, Moses finds refuge in the house of the one who meant to kill him. The main point here is that 5 women play a key role in the beginning of the deliverance of Israel. Moses' birth and big picture Moses is born in a sinister time. And the author of Exodus places the story of his birth right after the story of the babies being drowned in the Nile. So readers are left to ponder how the child will fare in this ominous moment. And then we get to chapter 2, and he breaks the tension to let us know that this baby Moses is from the tribe of Levi. This is important. It's important to know here that all Israelite priests come from the tribe of Levi, and priests are seen as having special access to God's presence. Verse 2 lays out another bit of information that might be very easy to skip over if it weren't so weird. Did you notice this? It says, "The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months." Would she not have bothered had he been whatever the opposite of a fine baby is? What, an ugly baby, a sickly baby, an annoying baby? I don't know. It might not be obvious, but calling Moses fine, a fine baby, is another echo of the creation story. Fine is the Hebrew word found 7 times in Genesis chapter 1 for good. It's the same word. So we read that Moses' mother saw that he was good, as God saw that it was good. The mother's words are not just a random physical description of how cute her baby is. It's a not so subtle hint that this boy and his journey would be tied to the story of creation. And for us, not just creation. Jochebed, the mother of Moses, is a wildly courageous mother to knowingly carry her pregnancy to term, knowing that because of who that child is, he would likely die. Who does that remind you of? Not a TV screen. Who does that remind you of? Mary, thank you. Yes. In verse 3, we see another and very important allusion to Genesis. It says, when his mother was no longer able to hide Moses, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She tucked Moses safely into the basket and set him afloat along the Nile. What might this be an allusion to? A basket lined with tar to keep it afloat. The ark, yes, thank you, the flood story. The Hebrew word for basket, used here in verse 3 and 5, is the same word that appears as ark in the story of Noah. And that Hebrew word is found nowhere else in the Old Testament. So tying these two stories together is more than just a literary garnish. It is theologically loaded. The story of the flood in Noah's day isn't just about a bad stretch of weather. The flood waters are the chaotic, hostile, unlivable deep waters that God divides in half on day 2 of creation and then keeps at a safe distance above the dome. And because those destructive waters are kept at bay, then life can emerge in creation. And during the flood, God lets those same waters return to their chaotic state by opening the windows of the heavens. But Noah and his family are kept safe in the basket, in the ark. And through them, life on earth will begin anew once the waters subside. So similarly, Moses is kept safe from hostile waters in an ark basket. And like Noah, Moses is the focal person for a new beginning for a new people. And again, spoilers, but guess where else in Exodus God is going to save people through the water? Red Sea. Thank you for the physical description. Yes. Through the Red Sea. In a replay of the flood and creation stories, the Red Sea splits in half, giving the Israelites safe passage, and then comes crashing down to drown the Egyptians. So the story of Moses beginning at his birth is not filler. It's not cuteness. It is a firework bursting overhead to help us see the big picture. The birth of Moses and the story of the Exodus as a whole are wrapped up in a bigger story of God's recreation. And this brings me to my final point about Moses' birth and history. For some time, scholars have noted that the account of Moses' birth is very similar to another story not in the Bible. It's the story of the birth of King Sargon, who reigned about 2300 BCE. So like Moses, Sargon was born in secret. He was placed in a reed basket, closed with a lid, waterproofed with pitch, carried down river, rescued by someone drawing water, and raised as an adopted son. Exactly the same. The similarities are uncanny. So it might be the case that the writer of Exodus deliberately used a version of the Sargon story to give this character Moses some gravitas. But it seems more likely that both stories are really just following a rags to riches template, similar to how humble child of migrants works today, or abandoned baby left on a doorstep works today. Now, does that mean that the story of Moses is made up? It's a possibility, but I think it'd be wrong to read Exodus as simply a mythology. Because in those times, in antiquity, and we know this especially from the Greco-Roman world of the New Testament, when actual details of an important figure's birth and childhood are not known, it was not unusual to just create details that matched the significance of the hero. Does anyone know here the story of Romulus and Remus? Romulus and Remus, future founders of Rome, abandoned by a river as infants, raised by wolves. Sure. An Egyptian princess giving her founding slave child a Hebrew name seems very unlikely. A hero's birth story overlapping curiously with that of another and a better known hero is not coincidental. So all of this suggests that in Exodus we are not getting straight up history. An ancient Israelite writer is telling a story of the greatness of Moses and then creating scenes and dialogue that communicate that greatness. That's the point of the story. But here's the point for us. As much as history and today is littered with pharaohs, history and today is also littered with Shifras and Puas and Miriams and Jochebeds and daughters of pharaohs. When these women acted, they did not know who that baby would become. They did not know about God's plan for his future. They saved him because it was the right, human, caring, and compassionate thing to do. Their actions were not attention-seeking, miraculous feats. They were ordinary, quiet yet subversive acts made extraordinary by the grace of God. You think about it. 2 of the 5 women just did the jobs they were trained for by assisting in a birth. 1 waterproofed a basket. 1 kept watch on a baby brother. And 1 used their privilege to offer a solution to one problem. None of these women, I think, would have expected that their stories would be told thousands of years later. And yet their actions, decisions, and choices changed the world. Women who behave rarely make history, said Laurel Ulrich, in fact writing about an American midwife. They were all different, these 5 women of the Exodus story, and they were all the same because they each, in their own quiet way, put up a hand in the face of all the violence and death and injustice going on around them and said, no. And because of their actions, this child lives. And because this child lives, he will grow up to confront the very Pharaoh that ordered his death. Because this child lives, God will use him to lead the Israelites out of slavery through the Red Sea and into the freedom that is beyond. Because this child lives, he will receive the 10 Commandments and oversee the formation of the people of God. Liberation so often comes from small acts of defiance. Today, in this second Sunday of the season of Easter, we begin our journey here through a story of God stepping into history and delivering people from oppression and death. And the story begins with 5 insignificant women with low social capital. A little bit like a poor couple from Bethlehem, maybe. Because the work of God happens most often through the faithful and subversive acts of ordinary people like Shifra and Pua and Mary and fishermen and prostitutes and Jesus and you and me. Liberation happens through clever defiance of pharaohs, through civil disobedience, and through those who gestate or incubate liberation in its infancy. And that's what happened to Jesus, who was lynched and then rose, not just to show off, but to liberate slaves from oppression once again, once and for all, so that the whole of creation could be recreated. It is that liberation that we have received and that we celebrate in this season, and in fact every Sunday. But it also puts a demand on us. As we have been liberated, how can we liberate? I want to finish with a blessing written by Jan Richardson, and I encourage you to close your eyes and allow the blessing to come into your body. Believe me when I say there is nothing this blessing would not do to protect you, to save you, to encompass you. This blessing would stand between you and every danger, every evil, every harm and hurt. This blessing would dare to wade with you into the waters that come bearing life. It would make a way for you through the waters that come threatening death. I cannot explain how fierce this blessing feels about you, but I can tell you it has more than pledged itself to you. It would lay down its life for you and not once look back in regret, nor go in sorrow for what it has chosen to give. And you, so deeply blessed, so utterly encompassed, what will you save in turn? Not because it is owed, but because you cannot imagine failing to pass along this grace that casts its circle so wide, this love that flows so deep through this perilous and precious life. Amen.